right. Good evening, everyone. First off, thank you all so much for even coming out this evening. I know it's super hectic coming from work and things like that. So thank you so much for being here. Welcome to our event, Faith, Freedom, and the Future of Texas, hosted by us, Courier Texas, in partnership with Americans United. We are so happy that you all are here today. My name is Dawn Jones. I am the Texas Organizing Director at Courier Texas. And again, we are so happy to have you. Tonight in particular, we have gathered some of the most insightful minds to have a really critical conversation of sort of a complex topic, which is religion and politics here in Texas. And so today we have gathered journalists, faith leaders, legal experts, and a lot of the folks who really just understand kind of where we are right now. And so what we will be talking about tonight with these two topics is kind of how it's shaping our communities, our policies, and our lives, most importantly within like the most recent months. So tonight, we have 3 engaging discussions lined up, each focusing on different aspects of this topic. And so together, we will all dive into kind of how this has shifted our policy, our community engagement, and social justice. So we will go ahead and introduce one of our first panels. And to kick it off, we will start with Movement Voices, which is going to be moderated by our DFW Senior Newsletter Editor, Joy Louvier. Joy is a senior newsletter editor here with Courier Texas. She authors our daily newsletter for Dallas-Fort Worth. She is a 7th-generation Texan who has lived all over the country, but now resides here in Oak Cliff, Dallas, proudly, she says. And in her work, she focuses on people's stories and aims to share the experiences of the Metro's most marginalized. So with that, please help me welcome Joy Louvier to the stage.
And my panelists, and I'll introduce them. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Tonight we're going to be exploring the threat of religious nationalism in Texas and talking about how we can protect our interfaith communities, secular governance, and preserve democracy for all Texans. So let me introduce our panelists. So starting right here, we have the Reverend Colin Packer. He's the Director of Strategic Development for LTR Ministries, an organization that engages white Christians in the ministry of reconciliation and justice through education, inner work, and community. He served also as a lead minister for prominent churches in Littleton, Colorado, and Allen, Texas. And then to his left, we have Edwin Robinson. Edwin is a community organizer, the Reverend Edwin Robinson. Edwin is a community organizer, political strategist, and founder of Bridge North Texas, a 10-year regional campaign to build political narratives and economic power at organizing, and also developing Black faith leaders. He's also organized the Dallas Black Clergy for Safety, Equity, and Justice. And then to his left, we have the Reverend Charles Foster Johnson. Reverend Johnson is the founding pastor of Bread, a faith community in Fort Worth, and he's the founder and executive director of Pastors for Children, a nationwide network of clergy advocating for public education. And then last but not least, we have Kanae Turner. Kanae is the managing attorney and owner of KY Turner Law Firm. And she's an activist, former chief of staff for Texas State Representative Tony Rose, and has led multiple political campaigns throughout Texas. She's also the founder of the Barbara Jordan Leadership Institute. Okay, so opening up, we just want to kind of set the tone here. You see in the title, this panel includes Faith Isn't the Enemy. So I want to ask our panelists, what does that mean to you personally and within the communities you serve?
Certainly, we've seen examples of faith being the enemy in this state. We see all around us a threat that is a reality. Mic on? Do I need to?
Yeah, you're good.
So we have seen this threat all around us, and it's important that we name that threat, that we see the threat that's around us, see the impact that is there. No matter what the intent may be, the impact is happening to our communities. But there is also a side of faith that actually tries to follow the best principles of our faith. It can be an aid to the common good and to our communities being put in a better place when it comes to all kinds of topics. I've gotten to see the best of that in the city of Dallas. We're seeing it currently as we continue to see the deportations and detentions and seeing faith leaders rise up in our city, to see it in our state and the advocacy that happens, but there's more that must be done. So I'm excited for the conversation tonight as we think more about how we can make it less of an enemy and more of a friend.
Yeah. Reverend Robinson?
Thank you for that. Can you all hear me well? I'll use my command voice. I was in the Army. When I think about the question, I tend to separate faith and religion, and I know that that's very difficult for people to do. And so I'll use my own definitions because that'll be where I'm coming from. I think about faith as what you believe in, and people who believe in anything that is bigger than themselves.
Yes.
I think about religion in the context of how we go about working out that belief on a consistent basis. And so the two may not be the same. So tonight I may say something about faith and I may say some things about religion, but I'm trying to do my best to not conflate the two. So that'll be a delicate dance that I try to walk, and I may fall off the tightrope, but just catch me if I do. When I think about the question, I think that what some people believe in this country is my enemy. And I think that what some people believe in this country is my ally. And I'm trying to figure out how, as an organizer, how to organize as many people who believe in love, liberty, and joy, and freedom, and all those things, so that we can combat against those who believe in not those things.
That's right.
So that's kind of how I see that question working out for myself.
Yeah. Reverend Johnson, how do you interpret that?
Well, somebody said a long time ago that our faith wants to see our enemy as our brother or sister, rather than our brother or sister as our enemy. And this is a basic teaching of my tradition, the Christian tradition. We have other traditions and no religious tradition represented here. By the way, wonderful being with Americans United for the Separation of Church and State. Great partners to Pastors for Children. Respectful and affirming, and we're just a small little network of a couple of thousand clergy in America, but they have been such a great encourager to us. And now Courier Newsroom, which is just fabulous, and all these young leaders, which is what we need. Several of us commented in voting yesterday, going to the polls, all those young people voting. In Texas, this is an inspiration, and we had some good outcomes for the public good and the common good. So faith is a unifying force. Richard Rohr is a leader in the Christian movement that says any spirituality that is focused on the other person instead of on yourself is a false one. Well, we got a lot of what Brother Edwin called religion. We got a lot of false religion because it's focused on somebody else. I'm glad I'm not like her. I'm glad I'm not like him. And that's a violation and a contradiction of any authentic faith. So I think we're here tonight to try to mobilize the true, authentic impulse of faith for the common good, that we are in this together, not letting bad people divide us, but seeing that we have much more in common than in contradistinction with each other.
Hey, Ms. Turner?
Yes, kind of similar to what the rest of my panelists have said, but especially when I have seen in the space of the difference between faith, religion, and you can kind of say faith and spirituality, and how, I guess, millennials were leaving the church, but now they're coming back. And we work with that to work with our young people within the community, and particularly with our organization, which is focused on the Black community. We cannot ignore faith or religion or the church overall when it comes to getting them back active into learning that voice, and then also realizing, like, just taking the Christian faith, is Jesus was a radical, and some of these things that we are seeing is not of Christ. And so reimagining what, like we used to have those little wonderful bands, what would Jesus do? And reminding people, what would Jesus actually do when it comes to our community? Loving one another, loving our brothers and sisters, regardless of our differences.
Yes.
And try to re-implement that. However, also, we just not gonna fall for anything either. And so we look into how we're also gonna look for freedom here on earth as well, and fight for that. And our faith could be used for fighting for faith here on earth. I mean, freedom here on earth as well.
Reverend Robinson, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but what do you think are like the biggest misconceptions between faith communities and politics that lead to this great divide?
Ooh, could you help me with that question? The misconception between...
Yeah, like how the two work together in this day and age, especially with what's happening in Texas right now.
Oh, wow. Misconception.
Probably a lot.
Yeah. You know what? The truth is, I don't think there are a lot of misconceptions. I think we're clear. I think everybody's here in this room because we're clear about how faith communities and politics are working together in the state of Texas. We're watching it happen, whether it is trying to force feed people the Ten Commandments. I'm a Christian, but I mean, shoot, the Ten Commandments is tough, man. Like, the people in the Bible couldn't even do the Ten Commandments, man. So that kind of reality, I think watching people make decisions based upon the rhetoric that they hear in their faith communities. I think we see that showing up in the political space, and that's for good or for bad, right? Because I'm a member of Friendship West Baptist Church, and my pastor, the Reverend Dr. Frederick Douglass Haynes III, who we do call, right, our drum major
Yes.
for justice, right? And so his rhetoric, quite rhetoric, on Sunday morning, is rhetoric that actually affects how I vote, how I love, how I care, how I'm with other people, right? Because that's how connected I am to my faith. And so there are people whose rhetoric is not the same rhetoric that I hear on Sunday morning. And so I think we're not confused about how these things are intertwined. I think we're kind of clear about that. I think what we don't realize, though, is the power in our faith to actually make long-term social change. I think that there is one section of society, the current folks in power, who are very clear about how they use their faith to shape and transform society. I think there are another faction of people who I am more in tune with, who have abdicated that power to our opponent. And the more we abdicate that power to our opponent, the more we leave ourselves open for their attacks on that battleground. I told you I'm a former military, so I sometimes think strategy in that way. But I believe we leave ourselves open for our opponent to sort of take up all that space if we don't step into that arena.
Anyone else want to share around that? You guys agree?
You know, we have 550,000 Christian churches in this country. It's a prominent institution. People are motivated in their religious pursuit by fear, oftentimes. And that fear is causing them to otherize, to other folks. And you have this phenomenon of preachers who are in these mega churches who feed and fuel that fear. It's their program. I want us to see that for every mega church with 1,000 people, there are a whole lot of churches with 100 people. And those churches are on streets, in neighborhoods, walking the sidewalks and meeting the needs of children and elderly and people there. What we try to do in Pastors for Children is be grassroots, roots. Get that congregation connected to that local school in the right kind of way, which is why religious liberty is at the key of what we do, is at the center of what we do. Because we come into the school with these open and this closed. And when you do that and you multiply those good works in the neighborhood, it has a contagious effect. Are we there yet in the tipping point? I don't know. We had a pretty good night last night, I think. And the headline in the New York paper, the day before the election, front page, top fold, was 600 congregations feeding those hungry people. Did anybody see it? Raise your hand. In the New York Times. I didn't miss it. 600 Manhattan churches and Brooklyn churches and all those boroughs feeding those hungry people. That's what we have to do. That's what we have to replicate. That is what faith mobilization for the common good is all about.
Reverend Packer, what other ways are we seeing religious narratives championed by one group more than another outside of what we're seeing in Texas schools? We all know there's a lot going on there. We're going to touch on that later. But what are some other ways it's showing up?
I'm thinking about, I appreciate couching it in religious nationalism because it's larger than just Christian nationalism. I think white on the front of that is an important term to put there too, because that's really what this is after. It is a scared faith that needs to coerce people into following its regulations and rules and to put its regulations on the walls rather than the beautiful, winsome, public witness of a faith that actually looks like churches that take care of people when it comes to plagues and takes care of refugees and asylum seekers. It's a scared faith that needs to reach for power in the sense of legislation and those sorts of things to force people to follow a white Christian religious nationalism in this sense. The current person who is leading this country right now at the administration is talking about how he's going to defend faith. I'm sorry, the faith that I follow doesn't need any defending.
Not by him.
And that's, thank you. This is not a scared faith that needs defending. This is a faith that's always been at its best on the margins, following a Jesus in Matthew 25 that speaks to caring for those who are thirsty and clothing those who are naked and visiting those in prison and declaring the year of the Lord's favor. We need that year of Jubilee to be released today in the midst of debt, as we see, in the midst of SNAP benefits being taken. This is not the faith that needs defending. It's not anything we want on the Christian faith. And for centuries, this has been the move of Caesars and emperors and rulers, is to somehow coerce and use a faith in order to accomplish an agenda that has nothing to do with the one we follow. And so that's my word for that, is this is not a faith in need of defending. It's a faith that needs to be lived out in compelling and beautiful and winsome ways. And that's what we're seeking to do when it comes to the organizing front in Texas right now.
Hear, hear.
Mr. Nert, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how this extremism really erodes, democracy and civic trust within Texas. Ms. Turner?
Oh, sorry. I did not hear you say my name. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how this extremism, erodes, a democracy and civic trust throughout the state and the nation.
So I think it comes more into the fact that we're not understanding the underlining reasons of why are you pushing for the 10 Commandments to be in the school? Why are you pushing for buying Bibles and praying on the 50-yard line after a game? And I get it, we are in Texas. Next to God, it is football, but especially in those rural communities that we work in. But it is educating sometimes, hey, their motive for this push is not in line for or protection of what you're trying to get for. So it's educating the community a lot more of kind of like what are the underlying reasons. I will even say for these past 17 amendments that just all passed, and we saw parents' rights on the ballot and U.S. citizens to be the right to vote. Well, one, that's already in the Texas Constitution. What's the underlying reason for that? Oh, because they didn't pass the SAVE Act in Congress or here, their version here in Texas. So we're going to eventually probably require people to show up their birth certificates. When a lot of older communities, elders, especially Black communities, they might have been birthed by a midwife. They might not have that birth certificate anymore. Even when it came to the parents' rights, of course, you as parents have the right over, the decisions for your kids, but then that conflicts with, hey, John might not be of the Christian faith. Why should we force the 10 Commandments on him? Because Susie parents are like, yes, I want to make sure the 10 Commandments are in there, or you're violating my rights as a parent by not having Christian values taught into the schools. And so it's us learning more, teaching our communities how to navigate and really understand those underlining intentions. When it comes to, on the surface, it might seem good. It might even follow kind of their religion or their faith, but what is the real intentions underneath it? And we have seen that them use God and Christianity to maneuver their ways to justify some of the things that they have done. Yet we see the opposite when we see cutting of SNAP benefits and furloughing, people losing jobs. So just trying to teach our community what are those true intentions are.
Yeah. This is a question for all of you, so pop in if you feel so called. So what are some things that community organizations and faith leaders in your spheres are doing to push back against this narrative and kind of, come out with their own, representation of what their faith means to them, specifically Christianity, I guess now?
Oh, man. Oh, my mic is working. Hey. So I do a lot with faith communities. That's where the most of my organizing is. I organize everybody because we need to build a lot of power. I think one of the things that we're really trying to do goes back to what I said before. We, in this moment, I know that a lot of people are leery about faith. And whether it's the Christian faith or the Muslim faith or the Jewish faith or the Baha'i faith, so on and so forth. And because I'm very clear from a tactical perspective that our opponent is using faith in order to win, I'm doing everything that I can to teach, train, and develop people on how to use their faith to actually live out the values that they seek, and how to use that faith to pull other people into the work.
Right.
How to, whether that, I used to be a young adult and singles pastor. And so at one of those mega churches, as a matter of fact, I had about 3,000 young adults and singles who I was responsible for. And all 3,000 of those young adults and singles they don't all go to church every Sunday anymore. Some of them are in this room, I said. But they don't all go to church on Sunday anymore. But even though they don't go to church on Sunday, that doesn't mean that the messaging, the tactics, the ideas, and the strategies that they've learned in their faith communities, that they've learned in their spaces, can't be used on the field to make social change. And so what we then attempt to do is create third space. So you may not be going to Bible study every Wednesday anymore, and you may not be going to Sunday worship, but you can come to this organizing space and you can live out your faith through this social change. Maybe that is, giving some food, but that's also turning people out to the polls. Maybe that is, doing some backpacks and stuff, but that's also, let's create this voter guide so that people in my community can understand these 17 amendments, right? So the more that I think that we can actually help, so that, this is what it is, so that Sunday morning, Wednesday, Saturday, or Friday, whichever day that people show up in their faith spaces, that's not the space for people's political activation.
No.
That is the space for people to get care, comfort, love, and feel a sense of connection. And also get some knowledge to raise their consciousness. But there needs to be a third space that's connected to that where they can work that stuff out in the world. And that's what we try to create. That's what we try to create.
These policies, we all know this, it's the reason we're in the room, are designed to distract us from the real thing. The real thing is to provide universal education for all our children that is high quality, that's costly. 65% plus of our children are poor. It's costly to educate a poor child who is deprived of the security and amenities that middle-class kids take for granted. Increasingly, the power structure of this state does not want to pay for that biggest ticket item in our Texas budget. It's now about a $75 billion biennium, or 80, I think it stopped 80 billion now. All of this policy is paid for primarily by two people in Texas, Tim Dunn in Midland and Ferris Wilks in Cisco. They are mega billionaires that do not believe in America. They do not believe in a multicultural democracy where people of color are equal to white people, where female people are equal to male people, where LGBTQ people are equal to heterosexual people, where poor people are equal to middle class and affluent people. They don't believe that. They believe that they and a few others in an oligarchy ought to be in charge. And let me tell you something, they're buying our legislature. In fact, they are buying our legislature. And I could give you specific examples of that. And what we've got to do, it needs to be said, I can say it because we have a 501c4. We must have remedy at the polls next November 2026. We don't have to have a majority in the legislature that's going to protect the constitutional provision of the common good. We're not going to get a majority likely, but we've got to flip 3 or 4 seats to give the message to everybody else, we're coming after you next. Yes. And what'll happen, we talked about it backstage, when the governor comes to those Republican House members and says, I want your vote on bluebonnet curriculum promoting Christian faith, a certain interpretation of the Christian faith in the public institution, need your support on 10 Commandments, need your support on this anti-gay legislation. Those Republican, conservative, Governor, I went with you last time, but I'm not going with you this time. This time I'm going to vote the will of my constituents because they fired 4 of my colleagues, yes, and they're going to fire me next. And y'all, that's where the rubber hits the pavement. That's what it's all about. And the best thing we can do is go to our Sunday school classes, go to our mosques, go to our synagogues and churches and talk to people about voting. Right, Mara? Voting. Go register, go vote, get 10 other people. Reverend Edwin just said it. Go distribute a voter guide. Do it through your Sunday school class because voting is an inherently American act, it's a democratic act, it's also an act of faith right now. All faith is voluntary, y'all. If it's authentic and true, it's voluntary. And anytime Caesar's trying to promote it with you, you run the other way. Anytime some preacher says, listen to me, follow me, anytime a preacher wants to leverage the power of the government to promote some kind of religious message, you cancel that guy out, and it will be a guy except for Paula White. You cancel that guy out as soon as you can.
Oh, Reverend Johnson just teed up my next section. Thank you. and so I want to ask y'all, what do you want people to do right now? What can people do right now to push back on this extremism and preserve the democracy here in Texas and abroad? And not just people in faith communities, but people right here in this room, people streaming right now who might not necessarily subscribe to a specific faith or spiritual practice. What can they be doing right now?
So I will say that, one, starting with the voting ballot box. That was yesterday. That's fine. You got it coming up probably in January, depending on where you are at. Probably some in December, because there are additional runoff elections coming up. But continue to hold those people that you elected or who represents you accountable. Go to your city council. Go to your county commissioner's court. Texas is only in session every 2 years. However, you can talk to your state representative, your state legislator. I used to be a chief of staff. You can talk to them about policies that you want to see coming up next. It doesn't stop at the voting box. You're like, well, they said they were going to do this, but did you hold them accountable? So it is up to us. We are their constituents, regardless if we vote for them or not, to hold these people who, we live in a democracy, but also a representative republic, which they represent us. That's what kind of a republic means. So they represent us. So make sure that they are voting according to your needs, what you're trying to get out for your community. I even saw during this past legislative session, some Republicans did not vote just in line. They actually well, I'm gonna look to see what my constituents want. And this is something that they are against. Now that's very few, but remember, hey, you don't, Democrat or Republican, your loyalty is not to your party, it is to your constituents that put you there in office. So regardless of what your faith is, or if you're in Austin, don't have a faith at all, remember, you're still be an active citizen here in this society, in this nation, in this state, in this city, by using your voice in any kind of way. And that includes the voting ballot, the polling ballot, or going to your local officials to talk to them.
Anybody else?
We've talked a lot about Christian or religious nationalism and this move of coercion. There's a lot of Christian resignation as well. And I can't speak to all faiths. I can speak to my own community to say that when I was a pastor, I was told all the time, you keep that out of the pulpit. Partisanship isn't always helpful in churches, but politics, how we seek the common good, there's no doubt that that's what Jesus was about. There's no doubt that that's what our faith calls us to. And we can think nationally, we can think federally, we can think at the state level. Those are important conversations, but it's got to start locally. What's happening at your local elementary school? What do your principals and teachers need? How do you help adopt a school around you and not go in assuming you know the answers, but listen closely to hear what is the cry coming from your community? Who are the parents that are scared to take their kids to school right now because they know that our schools are magnets for ICE to pick up their parents?
Absolutely.
What are the things we're going to do to stand beside others in this moment locally, rather than being hopeless when it comes to the larger national picture? So get involved in your school board. Pay attention to what's coming through the curriculum and on the 10 Commandments list, and make sure you're standing up for all people that are there. What's going on in your faith community and in other faith communities around you? Up in Collin County, we have an interfaith group that's trying to get together and have conversations and seeking to understand one another. When we understand one another and when we're in proximity, all of a sudden issues are not just issues, they're about my brother, my sister, my neighbor.
Amen.
And our faith has clear things to tell us about that. So my call is about proximity. Get close. There's a lot of people who look like me who are not being affected by snap cuts right now. And the fact is, if you're not affected by it and your 401k is going up or the stock market continues to rise, you can act like there's no issue out there. Get close to the suffering, hear the cry that is out there. We serve a God in my tradition that hears the cry. and calls on people like Moses and others that are near the palace to say, you're staying blind and you're staying deaf to the cry around you, and it requires you to get close and to spend some of your privilege to get close to those who don't have any, to speak up and to hand the mic over for those who've been here a lot longer than we have, and to follow some people of color that are leading in this way.
Yeah, I'll say that was really great, both of you. Connect to a vehicle of power, right? Our dear Saint Fannie Lou Hamer would say, you know, with an open hand, there's diffuse power. I can make a mighty slap, but if I ball that hand up, I got a mighty fist that can strike a blow. And so I say that to say a lot of time, COVID, social media, internet, all kinds of things have pushed us into our corners and made us very individualistic and keep us in our own spaces. And so the energy that you want to exercise, go find a third space, a vehicle of power to exercise that energy through, so that you're not just slapping at the wind, but you're working with other people and making a mighty blow. The other thing I'll say, don't just go to any third space. If they don't have a strategy for how, if they just saying we're going to win, but they ain't telling you how, go somewhere else, because you will be wasting your time spinning your wheels, right? The other thing is, so I'll say that, connect to people who have a strong strategy and have a long-term vision for social change. Not just a in the moment, this is what we're going to do right now. Now, you can be in those spaces to go out and do those things, but make sure you transfer that power into a space that is saying, okay, well, what are we going to do for the next 10 years or the next 20 years? Because social change is a long-term project, not an immediate sort of fix and high.
That's true.
So that's what I would say.
I love these responses, very helpful to me. You do have to be strategic and you have to be connected in a community. Don't try to do this by yourself. It's demoralizing doing it by yourself because the powers and the principality, Caesar. Caesar wants you to remain by yourself. The power of faith is to put you in relationship with God, yes, but with others, in a family, in a community. If you're not a person of faith, we respect that. There are other organizations that you can be a part of and feel that solidarity with each other. Every one of the panelists have struck that note. I think it's extraordinarily important. It certainly is helpful for me. I lead a church called Bread in Fort Worth with 50 people. I led Trinity Baptist Church in San Antonio with 10,000 people. One is just as powerful as the other. I think that the political class wants us to be afraid of each other. So go especially to that person who would not instinctively be at an Americans United event. Go to that person who votes different from you and make conversation with her. It ain't gonna kill you. It might raise your blood pressure, but there's medicine for that. And see if you can't form some kind of bond. Somebody at that Interfaith Alliance meeting, or I don't know, I'm in a lot of meetings, which is a good thing, isn't it? You are too. We're in meetings every other night now. That didn't used to exist. Now we're woke, to use a word. And somebody talked about democracy on the porch. Democracy coffees. I love that. I think that's right. And let's see if we can't find some linkages, some alliances, some commonality. Look, the 10 Commandments, everybody in this room has enough power to expose that lie. Politicians don't need to post the 10 Commandments on the wall, they need to keep them. And the person who's promoting the posting on the wall is the person who's violating them.
Absolutely.
And you can always take that to the bank.
That is a great segue into our next panel. Before we leave, in just a phrase, a couple words, can you all just go down and say what is giving you hope right now? Ms. Turner?
What is giving me hope right now? I would say yesterday is fresh on him, but yeah, yesterday wins or change in the mood of democracy has shown that, hey, Caesar, you got people fighting back. So I think that is giving me hope right now, because I was a little worried on, we had things that elections has consequences, and we very much saw within this first year, it's been a year since he's elected, since it started, that those consequences very much came true. And so last night we saw that in essence that the people are standing up for their morals, their rights, and what is good. And we're seeing an overcoming, and I hope we stay on that path of righteous, actual, faith and righteousness for all. So that's what's giving me hope.
All of you give me hope. These brilliant young leaders, I'm getting long in the tooth. And it's good to look out and see a whole bunch of young leaders and young adults. This gives me a lot of hope. Last Saturday, we brought Gina Hinojosa to the St. Stephen Baptist Church of Fort Worth. By the way, Courier, Texas, we're the ones that organized that. Give us some love in your article on it. And Gina's great. We talk to her every day. She gives me hope. All those people in that sanctuary give me hope. I think people are alert and aware. I think they're angry. I think they're channeling that anger, as others have on this panel have encouraged us to do. That gives me a lot of hope. We've got a year before the next election. We got a lot of work to do. We can get it done. Do I hear an amen?
Amen.
A lot of things are giving me hope. I'm very hopeful right now, but just to name a few, Zoran Mamdani is giving me hope. The state of Mississippi, break it, is giving me hope.
Amen.
The long lines at the polls yesterday is giving me hope.
No question.
And everybody that I've worked with in this city for a decade, some of you who are in this room right now, Sean Reed, Minister Bates, St. Luke, y'all, that's what's giving me hope, man, because ain't nobody quitting around here, and that's what I'm talking about.
Take us home, Reverend Packer.
I grew up in this city. My family's been here for over 100 years. I was designed from my church and my segregated academy I went to in this city to never see the things that I'm seeing today. To never be in coalition with people different from the ones that I'm in coalition with now. It came at a cost sometimes to open your eyes and to be willing to see and to partner with, but it took Botham Jean's murder in this city for me to see something that I hadn't seen before, part of a tradition that had never done anything around justice, who now know each other and are having monthly lunches. And that spread to ecumenical relationships and interfaith relationships. This can happen. And I'm committing my life and my ministry right now to go in engaging white Christians to help them see the things that I couldn't see without someone coming alongside to do it. Alongside leaders of color that are helping us craft curriculum and say things that really matter in this moment. And to put them under leadership of people of color. When I see that happening in our churches and in spaces I would have never expected, in spaces I should have never been woken up from, it gives me hope that others like it. And to see the conversations happen with our kids in a different way. To see the cultural nights at my kids' school that is far different from in the segregated academy I grew up in. I see Dallas differently, and I'm seeing others that are seeing Dallas differently. This gives me hope tonight, and I'm excited for the years ahead.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, good joy, Dad. Yes. Okay.
Back there, okay.
Okay. Come back this way. Okay. That was good.
Yeah, we will. We're just gonna give you these mics back. I'll see if I can take it out myself. What do you think? I'm like, am I figuring it out? I don't know.
Alrighty, now you can hear me, and I can hear myself. Okay, first of all, what a amazing panel discussion. Are you all feeling the same, or am I alone in feeling like, wow, like what valuable insights there? And so, yeah, like I'm feeling hopeful. Are y'all feeling hopeful? Can we get like some hands raised if we're all feeling? I think that last question of like, what can you do right now is what really kind of, shifted the room. And so again, that is what tonight is about, and really just how grassroots advocates are reclaiming this moment and really meeting this moment. And so with that, we will introduce our second panel. So our second panel is titled Faith 101, What's at Stake for Texas Students? And this is really about how we have seen this shift that we just talked about with the 10 Commandments inside of the classrooms, and a lot of the things that are kind of happening kind of just under our nose. And so today we have some legal experts, we have some educators, and some folks who can really speak to what is happening right now inside of our classrooms. And so moderating that panel is our DFW political correspondent, Katie Serrano. Katie is the author of our newsletter, which is dedicated around education. And Katie has been covering education for Courier Texas for quite some time. And it really came up around the session and things that we were seeing being introduced inside the legislative session. And we saw that a lot of folks were trying to understand what was happening. A lot of decisions were being made, and folks didn't understand. And so Katie did a lot of that coverage. And so now she has a newsletter that comes out weekly where she covers education here in Texas, specifically in North Texas, but kind of just all over. Let me get her card, 2 seconds. All right, and so with that, Katie has lived here for 20 years. She has a passion for making local journalism accessible, and she enjoys engaging young audiences. She has covered education here in North Texas, as well as housing affordability and local politics. With that, can we please welcome Katie Serrano?
Thank you, Dawn. Can you guys hear me okay? No? Okay. I'll try and project maybe a little bit better. Okay, thank you all for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. We have a really insightful, interesting conversation in store. Tonight you're gonna hear from Amy Tai. She is Senior Litigation Counsel at Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Amy focuses on keeping state-mandated religion out of public schools and fighting against the weaponization of religion to undermine public education and other civil rights. You're also going to hear from Kara Achar. She serves as the engagement coordinator at the ACLU of Texas and leads their policy and advocacy work in the free speech and pluralism issue area. Kara received her bachelor's in industrial and labor relations from Cornell University and her master's in social work from the University of Houston. And finally, you're going to hear from Cameron Samuels. They're the co-founder and executive director of Students Engaged in Advancing Texas, or SEAT, which is a movement demonstrating youth visibility in policymaking. With SEAT, Cameron has spearheaded grassroots opposition to anti-LGBTQ+ mandates in Texas school districts and introduced legislation to elevate student rights. So again, thank you all for being here. As if you're here, I'm assuming that you know that a lot of new laws were implemented this year that are really not only impacting our students and our teachers and our classrooms, but that are chipping away at the separation of church and state in Texas. There's Senate Bill 10, which requires that the 10 Commandments be displayed in public school classrooms. Senate Bill 11, which created a designated prayer time in our public schools, and although that is meant to be voluntary and encompass all religions, we have our Attorney General, Ken Paxton, pressuring and urging students to use that to recite the Lord's Prayer. We have Senate Bill 12, which created a blanket ban on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in our K-12 public schools, and Senate Bill 13, which made censorship and book banning easier by taking power away from librarians and giving it to school boards and parents instead. So we've got a lot to discuss and cover, so we can dive right in. So throughout the work that you've all done, what's the response from parents and students been like since these bills have passed? And what harm do laws like SB 10 or SB 11 that again are really focused on white Christian nationalism, what harm do they have on families who may not identify as white Christian nationalists?
Thank you. Good evening. I am also on the 10 Commandments litigation team. And what we're seeing from the 10 Commandments cases is that parents, religious and non-religious alike, are united in their desire to keep religious education out of public schools. Families are fighting back against politicians and school officials who are forcing the 10 Commandments in every classroom throughout Texas. But Texas families don't want their public schools turned into Sunday school. And these laws that are imposing Christianity on public school students harm religious minorities and non-religious families. As an example, in our first Texas case, our lead plaintiff is a parent and a rabbi, and posting the Christian version of the 10 Commandments at her child's school, where her child is already one of few Jewish students, sends a message to their family that they don't belong, that they're outsiders. We also represent a Hindu family, and in Hinduism, there are many manifestations of the divine. But our client's 3 children would be instructed day in and day out by the 10 Commandments, which say there's only one God. So this is the state that's telling our clients, A, Christianity is superior, and B, your Hindu faith is wrong. And we're also seeing that, these laws harm Christian families too. We represent some Christian parents who are clergy, and they don't want their religion weaponized, politicized, and forced upon public school students. They want their children to learn about faith through their faith community, through their house of worship, through their family, not imposed on them by the government.
Yeah, so I think, a lot of parents, to sort of get to the piece of how parents are responding to SB 10 and SB 11, I think a lot of parents had no idea this was happening, which is a point I'm going to keep harping on, which is that sometimes the folks in this room, the folks on this panel, get caught up in our echo chamber of, oh my gosh, SB 10 is moving, it's so intense, and it's drawing up the focus from this, and it's at this stage in the Texas legislative process, and we forget that most Texans aren't watching the Texas legislature, and they aren't able to keep track of the very many bills that are passing, in part by design. And so then when suddenly their student goes to school, starting in August and September, and there's a copy of the 10 Commandments in their kindergarten classroom, they don't understand why, they don't understand how, and then when they reach out with questions, it feels like there's not a lot that they can do, right? Which is why litigation can be so powerful, because it is this tool of speaking legally for folks who don't feel like they have the opportunity to show up in court. But I think with laws like SB 11, the nice thing about that surprise that parents are feeling is that there's still an opportunity to advocate as a non-lawyer. So I'm not a lawyer, and a thing I think a lot about is the fact that SB 11 has a local option. So it is a bill that requires that school boards vote on a period of prayer in their school districts. It doesn't specify what that period of prayer exactly needs to look like, though the Attorney General has made very clear what his intention of that period of prayer would be. And the nice thing about that is because your school board is only required to vote, it means they can vote no, which isn't necessarily a choice that people have with the 10 Commandments right now. And so if you're feeling upset about SB 10, I would really urge people to take the opportunity to coordinate with the ACLU of Texas, to coordinate with SEAT, to coordinate with members of your own community, to go to your school board and say, hey, I want you to vote no. Because it's the nicest feeling to be shocked and a little bit horrified by what your legislature is prioritizing, and then know that that's not the last time you have a chance to have a say in what's happening.
Our movement, Students Engaged in Advancing Texas, SEAT, Students Deserve a Seat at the Table, exists because we believe that students are the primary stakeholders in education. We are the ones that these decisions are affecting every day in the classrooms. The decisions that policymakers make in the legislature or at the school board level affect our futures as well. And right now we're seeing this so-called parental rights movement be a veil to advance Christian nationalism in our schools with the 10 Commandments bill that we had fought actually in the 2023 legislature. So this isn't just something that came out of nowhere. It also came after the In God We Trust signs, which was another law that had been passed that would require schools to put up In God We Trust signs in their schools if they're donated by community members or organizations. And so this has grown over the past few years as so-called parental rights has become this accelerating force that actually doesn't have anything to do with giving rights to anyone. It's taking away the rights of students to have welcoming and safe and conducive learning environments for our growth, for our diversity, but it also oversteps the rights of all Texas families, of other families where they might want their students to receive that LGBTQ affirmation. They may want diverse faith backgrounds to be supported in schools, but that's not the case with these kinds of laws. This is about taking away the decisions, claiming that this is giving parental rights, but in reality, it's centralized state authority. That's what I see this as. We see this trend over time in the legislature that they're taking more rights. The government is taking those rights from us. We're letting that slip away. And SB 13 is a prime example because that was under the guise of local school library advisory councils, right? Local. And this seems like something that would empower local communities. But many school districts may have already been reviewing books under consideration based on lottery systems. But these school library advisory councils with SB 13 actually are just puppet governments of school boards. The school board members get to decide who serves on these councils. And what is most alarming about that is that we've seen in Cy-Fair ISD in particular, some of those school board members who were elected on platforms specifically to ban books and to advance Christian nationalism, they've shared secret or confidential intel about their district with their spouse, information that their spouse now has the ability to mobilize their group to advance these issues for them, and that's not normal. Policymaking isn't just about the few people who have that power and relaying that information. It's about the public, and so the public is left in the dark. The public doesn't have that ability to serve on these committees when we know that a more accurate reflection of our communities does not support this. And SB 10 is something that students have also entered the school year not knowing about this, and now are seeing this on their walls. And it's really clear that students just want effective, competent solutions to the policy issues that we face today. If we are to fix the Texas-sized issues that we face today, we shouldn't have our lawmakers putting the 10 Commandments in classrooms. They should be giving us school supplies and other resources. They should be paying teachers well. They should be supporting students in the classroom as we come as who we are, not as who they want us to conform to. And that is the issue that many students, as part of our 300 student membership network at SEAT all across Texas, are seeing. We're facing that every day, and students don't like it.
And Amy, a hearing actually took place today over a lawsuit that Americans United was a part of over Senate Bill 10. Any details, updates, insights that you're able to share? And you kind of touched on it already, but just what that fight's been like for Americans United and for you yourself as a part of it.
Yeah. So with our partners at the ACLU, Freedom from Religion Foundation, and the law firm Simpson Thacher, Americans United has filed 2 cases in Texas so far, representing over 30 multi-faith and non-religious families who do not want the 10 Commandments forced upon their children in public school. There was a hearing today in San Antonio. It was about the second case that we filed in September. And it was a preliminary injunction hearing, and what that means is that we're asking the court to stop the school districts where our clients go to school, to stop the school districts from complying with SB 10. We are asking the court to order that the 10 Commandments posters that have gone up be taken down, and to prevent any more from going up. We're awaiting a decision on that, so unfortunately I don't have any breaking news. But what I can tell you from the first Texas case that we filed late summer, and the recent 10 Commandments cases that we have brought in Louisiana and Arkansas, is that we are winning. Imposing the 10 Commandments on public school children is unconstitutional. Full stop. The Supreme Court made this very clear 45 years ago in a case that dealt with a similar law in Kentucky. And it's still the law of the land today. But, of course, there's a movement to push this through again. And in our first Texas case, the judge in that case said that SB 10 is plainly unconstitutional, that it likely will pressure students into religious observance or suppress expression of their beliefs in school. And I think that courts they get what's going on. In our Arkansas case, the judge, in granting the preliminary injunction in that case, in his decision, he said, why would a state pass a law that is so obviously unconstitutional? And he went on to say, likely because the state is part of a coordinated strategy among several states to inject Christian doctrine into our public schools. And obviously, Texas is part of that coordinated strategy. So all of this is an ongoing fight, but I think it is heartening to see that for the 10 Commandments in public schools, so far the Texas courts, Louisiana and Arkansas, have continued to uphold our Constitution's promise of church-state separation and religious freedom.
And so we're hearing about this legal fight, but what role can parents play in fighting back against these policies? You know, what rights do they have that maybe they don't know about? Or what calls to action do you all have to share?
Yeah, so I talked about SB 11. I'm going to talk about SB 11 until I'm blue in the face because it's part of a concerted effort, right? So SB 10 didn't happen in a vacuum. SB 11 didn't happen in a vacuum. There was a bill called SB 763 last session, which tried to have schools adopt unlicensed chaplains as school counselors. That bill, on the whole, failed, right, in that it passed the legislature, but then because of that local option piece, there was incredible mobilizing by community members to say that, hey, chaplains are wonderful and also shouldn't be counselors. Counselors should be counselors, because that is a credentialing service. As a social worker, I feel very touchy about making sure we respect the expertise of a school counselor. And the nice thing is that that fight was joined not only by parents and by students, but also by chaplains themselves, who said, hey, we don't want to be in these schools. We want to be in our houses of worship and in our religious homes, which shouldn't be a public school. And the thing that parents can do, that community members can do right now, is to make sure that they push back against yet another attempt to inject Christian nationalism into our schools. Because if your school does adopt SB 11 and they do adopt that period of prayer, it's not just guidance by the Attorney General saying you should start with the Lord's Prayer. It's also the fact that you will have kids in a classroom that has the 10 Commandments on it, hopefully not for long, that the students will ask questions about in that prayer period. And so what religion will they be talking about in that prayer period? If there's a copy of the 10 Commandments in the same breath that you're saying, here's this period of prayer to talk about religion and to talk about religious texts. What questions will kids ask if there's a bill called SB 965 that passed this session that allows teachers to pray during official duties? If a teacher is allowed to pray during official duties, if SB 11 doesn't explicitly prohibit educators from encouraging prayer, and if you have a copy of the 10 Commandments in your classroom, then what is that conversation going to be in that period of prayer? What questions are those kids going to be asking? And does it really honor a parent's right to educate and guide the religious upbringing of their child if all of those conversations and all of those questions are happening in schools?
I don't know. Do you want me to go?
The Free Speech Academy?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, did you want to do a pitch for the Free Speech Academy? Yeah.
So, yeah, I keep saying, parents should do this and community members should do this. And a great follow-up question is how? Where are the resources, and how do we know what to do, and how do we know what the talking points are, and how do we know how to go to a school board meeting? And let me tell you, advocates are chomping at the bit to support you in that fight, to support your community members in understanding exactly how to go through that process. So here at the ACLU of Texas, we have a Free Speech Academy. It just wrapped up its second cohort. And the whole idea is to educate, really especially parents, but community members of all kinds, including students, on what the Open Meetings Act is and what the legal framework are for your rights as you go to the school board, on how to message to the media, because that's such an important part of advocating on an issue. On Advocating 101, Cameron actually taught one of our classes at the Free Speech Academy, and what the story of self and the story of us and the story of now can be to an advocacy effort. And the point of an academy like that, which is a 7-week program, is to empower everyday people to take action in their communities. Because as much and as hard as we try as an organization to fight for all of Texas, we are not big enough to see all of Texas and to show up in all of Texas. And so you have to have people who know their communities best understand how to show up and how to show out. And that's what we try to do. And the Free Speech Academy is going to start again in 2026, and so please sign up for our listserv so you can hear about applications for that. But in the meantime, there is a collaborative effort by folks at BJC, at Christians Against Christian Nationalism, at the ACLU of Texas, at Americans United, and Interfaith Alliance, and Freedom from Religion Foundation, and a lot of people who care a lot about this issue in creating a website, right, that I can share in just a second, that I think is called Stop Texas Prayer. And it is a repository of ways that you can advocate against SB 11 in your own local school district. You can also request Know Your Rights trainings, a School Board 101 that the ACLU of Texas does. You can reach out to SEAT if you know some students that are, engaged and wanting to advocate on this issue. There is no shortage of people who want to support advocacy, but it matters so much more for someone who is from a community to say what they want their community to look like than it matters for any of us to say it. And so I want people to know that power rests in your hands.
Absolutely, and the Free Speech Academy is an incredible program. Great to be part of that. And SEAT does very similar work with students. We have a fellowship and a boot camp that we do every single year, preparing students to organize and advocate in their communities, in their school districts, in the state legislature. even matching students to internships in lawmaker offices and with nonprofit organizations, so they're getting that hands-on experience and also being able to work from within government and outside of government to ensure that our Student Bill of Rights, which we crafted with over 100 students over a period of 5 months, our Student Bill of Rights can be our mission, our vision for Texas. And we have to tell a story about what is happening right now. We have to tell a story. That story matters. That perception of what people understand, what they're aware of. What does it mean to be a parent in Texas? What does it mean to be a student in Texas? And so while we might think of school board meetings as these divisive places, I mean, we can create a story of school board meetings being a place where community members, like parents and students, are showing up on these front lines of democracy to advocate for inclusivity, to advocate for welcoming and safe schools. And so we can flip that narrative on its side, just as they've infiltrated these school districts with a lot of PAC dollars and just this movement to censor, to instead now have a movement that is built by the people, built by those community values that we hold. We at SEAT believe that students are the experts of our own experiences. No one can tell us that we're not an expert of our lived experiences in the classroom with the identities that we hold, with our background, with our culture. That is something that's important to us, and so we bring that to the table when we advocate. And if we aren't telling those stories, then policymakers aren't getting a glimpse of our realities. And so they might make policies about what they think is happening in schools or in classrooms. And the community might go along with it because that's what they're seeing. But when we are able to say, no, students don't actually want this, our parents don't actually want this, then we can tell a different story. And that's a necessary story to tell.
Yeah, I echo comments about engaging in local advocacy and, putting in another plug that Caro mentioned. Each school district is making its own decision about whether it wants to implement a policy about school-sponsored prayer time. Each school district is making its own decision about whether they want to implement the Bluebonnet curriculum, which infuses Christianity and Bible stories in K through, fifth grade, K through 5 curriculum. So it is so, your voice really matters, right? Because this is happening at the local level at your school district. So it's so important to find out when, look at the agenda, find out when they're talking about this, show up at the board meetings, organize with parents so that you don't feel like you're the only one sticking your neck out. Write your board members. I think all of this is so important. And I think there is hope there to make a change. The other thing I would say to keep in mind in advocacy is that white Christian nationalists frame our oppositions to these laws as anti-religion, right? And so in thinking about your advocacy, I would think about how can you show that that the reason you don't want a certain policy or law is about protecting religious freedom, both from religion and of religion, right? And I think SB 11 is a good example of that because teachers and students already have a First Amendment right to pray in school, right? They don't need a complicated policy that has constitutional concerns that will be an administrative burden on teachers in the district, taking away from actual time that we want them teaching the students. And so I think in advocating for something like that, when you show up to your school board meeting or however you frame it, you can say this is not about anti-religion. We are for our teachers, our students, to be able to exercise their religion in school, and that is already protected, so we don't need these laws, right? So I think that's one thing I wanted to share. And then the last thing is from my 10 Commandments experiences, because it always comes back to the 10 Commandments, is, personally it's been really moving to speak with so many families across Texas, and really inspiring to see families from different faiths, different backgrounds come together with the shared goal of religious freedom and keeping state-mandated religion out of public schools. It takes a lot of courage to fight back, to be a plaintiff in one of these cases. And understandably, some of our clients were nervous at first. They didn't know how their community would react, but they knew they had to do this. They needed to stand up for their First Amendment rights. And I think they'll tell you, and I think we might have a client here, Reverend Ben is here too, and I think they'll tell you that they have been pleasantly surprised by the support and appreciation that their community has shown them. People they didn't even expect would support them have come up to them to say, thank you for speaking up and doing this. So I leave that with you in terms of, just think, when you're thinking about, do I do this? It's a scary time to speak up, but it is so important to do it when you feel safe to.
And you all just kind of touched on it, but we just had an election yesterday. So can you all share the importance of local elections, school board elections, for parents who may seem overwhelmed, they don't know where to start, but they know they want to fight back. What are the importance of local elections, and how can they get started?
So, yeah, I can start. So to begin with, first of all, these elections have such low voter turnout. I believe this time statewide it may have been 17, which is actually more than previous years. So we actually have seen maybe a slight increase in turnout, but that's because we're seeing that our voices can be powerful in shaping these decisions. In Cy-Fair ISD, for example, last night, that was a school district that had a 6-to-1 board majority of Christian nationalists, of people who have made policy after policy, removing science from textbooks and targeting trans students, plethora of policies that community members, including SEAT, organize and mobilize to the front lines at these school board meetings to oppose. Huge community opposition. But yet, there was only one ally that we had on the school board. And now, with the results of last night, it's clear that Cy-Fair ISD, I'm not endorsing anyone right now, but Cy-Fair ISD, the community, sweeped a victory for people who believe in that inclusion, in that diversity that Texas is. Texas is a majority minority state. We have such vast geographic and cultural diversity all throughout our state. And our communities look different, but this is common across Texas, that we're seeing what happened in Cy-Fair ISD last night happen in other communities this year, but also in last year, in recent elections in the spring even. And so we're seeing that sort of flip on its side, where once Christian nationalists began taking over our school districts, people have been pushing back. And it's a testament to our voices. We're pushing back in a variety of different ways. And we're seeing that plateau. I feel like we do have an ability to curtail this, to really reclaim ownership of our education. And there's also Proposition 15 on the statewide ballot. And so this is a proposition, a constitutional amendment that did pass last night, as did every proposition pass. Unfortunately, the captions to these amendments don't actually use the language that the Constitution is actually amended. So even with low voter turnout, people are vastly uninformed about what they're actually voting for. And these are permanent changes to our Constitution. They have grave consequences. And Proposition 15 says that parents are the primary decision makers for their children, which is identical language that was used in HB 900, which is the book banning bill that passed in 2023. And so that has been this common language that has been used to bolster and justify Christian nationalism, laws like SB 10 and 11 and 12 and 13, the whole slate of these bills and privatizing our schools, but giving public dollars to private schools. And so this whole movement is about this idea of restoring those parental rights. But in reality, the consequences of Proposition 15 means that now certain people can possibly sue schools and win when they want to push Christian nationalism, when they're upset about books in our schools. They can have our Constitution of Texas backing that. And it's a question now of whose parents are really able to affect a state public education system of 5.5 million students.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say that I think it can get really overwhelming when you're trying to figure out how you're going to afford groceries and how you're going to get from place A to place B when you have 7 different soccer practices and activities to take your kids to, how you're going to use your precious 5 minutes. And I think that if you have those precious 5 minutes, I would beg you to use them as locally as you possibly can. Because a lot of people feel like what matters most is who is in the highest seat of power in your state or in your country. And truly what matters the most to your daily life is the person who probably lives in your neighborhood or the neighborhood next door. And so calling them, because they don't get nearly the kind of calls that your federal senators do, right? When you call them, you can genuinely impact their opinion on something. You can leverage your authority as their constituent, knowing that you're one of a much smaller number of constituents that they're responsible for representing. So if you have 10 minutes, by all means, please call everybody. But if you only have 5, I think focus on the people that most impact the lives of the people in your community, the kids who are knocking on your door asking for Halloween candy, who maybe have never seen faces that look like theirs because those books have been banned, who've never seen a religion that looks like theirs because there's only one poster up on the wall, who've never seen a sense of themselves or felt safe to come out to themselves to school because of the person who your phone call could change.
We also can look to our peers, our friends and family, as people we can not only shift policy, but shift culture. Mm-hmm. That is also so critical in this time where public awareness and understanding of these issues is going to influence the trajectory of policy in the coming years.
Yeah. I think just to tack on to that, school board members, the legislature, governor, right, they're all elected officials, so they are accountable to you, and regardless of whether you voted for them or not, right? So our duties, they don't end at the voting booth, right? So even if you get the person that you voted for, you have to keep advocating for what you want and make sure that your voice is heard. I think that something just, to wrap up and something to keep in mind about all of this with all the Christian, white Christian nationalism being pushed into public schools is that public schools are the building blocks to our democracy and having diverse communities. And in addition to secular education, public schools, that's where our kids learn openness, tolerance, how to connect with people that have different backgrounds or different beliefs. And in the long run, these are the experiences that actually protect religious freedom. And I think that's precisely why white Christian nationalists are weaponizing religion to divide and destroy our public schools. So, we can't let that happen. And we have to change the narrative and remind people that when we're talking about religious freedom, what we're talking about is the ability for all of us to be able to live as ourselves, believe as we choose, so long as we don't harm others.
Great, well, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're at time. There's so much to chat about, so I hope you guys stick around if anyone has any questions after. But thank you so much. This was really insightful.
Really good answers, and they were all long. Such great insight. What the heck? That was so good. Yeah. Okay, you ready? Yeah. Okay. All right, everyone. Can we give another round of applause for that last panel? So great. And again, Katie is the author of the Tex Ed report that comes out every Wednesday at 4 p.m. So if you want more information on education in Texas, Katie's your girl for sure. So with that, we will lead into our keynote conversation. So last but not least, we do have a very powerful discussion coming up next. So I will go ahead and introduce our next moderator, who is our Texas Chief Political Correspondent, Matt Henney. Matt has worked as a reporter and editor for nearly 30 years in Texas, Georgia, Arizona, South Carolina, and Kansas, focusing on telling the stories of local communities so they become more engaged and better informed. Please join me in welcoming Matt Henney.
Hi, folks. In this conversation, we want to connect the dots by defining Christian nationalism, explaining what it means, and showing people why they should care. And with me is Rachel
Lazar.
Thank you.
No
Thank
problem.
you. And I've practiced this for like 3 days. Rachel Lazar is the president and CEO of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. She's led the organization since 2018 and is its first non-Christian and female leader in its 78-year history. Rachel is a lawyer, advocate, and strategist who oversees the organization's work to protect freedom of conscience for all and ensure religion is not used to justify discrimination. And prior to coming to AU, Rachel worked as an educator on white privilege and racism and held positions as deputy director of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, director of the cultural program at Third Way, and senior counsel at the National Women's Law Center. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
So, far-right Republicans in Texas have turned politics here into a spiritual battle, successfully expanding their cultural wars and continuing to blur the line between church and state, even claiming that the separation of church and state is a myth. Why should that concern Texans?
Yeah, well, first of all, hey out there, Texas. We see you. We actually feel pretty positive about what we see out there in you all. And it's an honor to have the opportunity to speak with Texans. We're spending a lot of time here these days trying to support folks on the ground. Firstly, what you said is true, and it's happening all over the country. There's so much disinformation and claims that the separation of church and state isn't even protected in the Constitution. In fact, the Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, said that at Conroe Church, and he's the guy who President Trump picked to be the head of his so-called Religious Liberty Commission. So the problem is very real. And because of that, before I say why it's a problem to attack church-state separation, I wanted to do a really quick church-state separation 101.
Okay.
Because I think we all need it, actually, and civics education, was long ago for many of us and maybe didn't linger on this one, but today we have to correct the record. And so let's talk about it. So number one, church-state separation is protected by our founders very clearly. Okay, and that's the place I wanted to start. So, Thomas Jefferson famously said in his letter to the Danbury Baptists back in 1802, right, that when he was celebrating the First Amendment, he was celebrating it for protecting and having a wall of separation between church and state. That's the quote part, okay? So he said it, he's one of the inspirations for the First Amendment of our Constitution. James Madison is thought of as the very architect of the First Amendment, and he wrote in a statement 20 years later, strongly guarded is the separation between religion and government in the Constitution of the United States. There's this other thing, and I just can't resist because I just sort of rediscovered it and read it again today on the plane. It's called the Treaty of Tripoli. Who's heard of that? Okay, I like that. 1797, President John Adams signs this into law with unanimous support from the Senate, right? They're worrying about the Barbary pirates and attacks in what is now called Libya, right? And which was Tripoli. So they signed this sort of peace treaty. And here's what Article 11 back then in 1797, awfully close to the founding of our country, says, quote, as the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, it has in itself no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of Muslims. Just wanted to read that out loud. So there's, what the founders said, super clear. That's point number one. Point number two, the Supreme Court a dozen times, starting in the 1800s, has reaffirmed that the separation of church and state is protected by our Constitution. Third, and I'll finish there and then I'll get into the attacks. Sorry, this is really long for a half an hour panel, but it has to be said because we have to go back to the basics here for all of our sakes, okay? Third are the words of the Constitution, right? Those first 16 words of the First Amendment, right? There's the non-establishment clause and the free exercise clause, and they work together to protect religious freedom because you can freely exercise your religion, but not until you're imposing it on me because I don't get to freely exercise my religion. And the non-establishment clause says, and the government doesn't get to play favorites between me and you or between the religious and non-religious. Not allowed in America. And the thing is, that is an American original, the separation of church and state. So true patriots should be very proud to defend church-state separation. There's also Article 6, no religious test for office, and on and on. Why should we be worried about the undermining of church-state separation? Like, what's the point? Number one, it protects religious freedom, like we just talked about. It ensures that the government isn't favoring some of us over others of us. It's protecting all of us equally and giving all of us equal opportunity, period, the end. So that's point number one. Point number two, there's a host of other freedoms and rights that really depend on church-state separation. If you care about reproductive freedom, if you care about LGBTQ equality, if you care about inclusive public schools that make all of our kids feel welcome, if you care about the freedom to read and to learn, right, very basic things, right, then you care about church-state separation. You just might not have realized it yet. Point number three, church-state separation, and my colleague Amy made this point, it protects religion as much as it protects religious freedom because it stops the government from co-opting religion and dirtying religion and using it for political ends. Point number four. I know this is super long. Bear with me. I'm almost done, I promise. But it stops divisions. And if you look at America today, I think most of us would agree that this is one of the most divided times we've lived through in all of our lives. And one of the reasons is because of the undermining of church-state separation, because it pits us against each other. And our founders realized that. They came from those bloody wars. In our early colonies, literally Quakers were even put to death in certain places for being Quakers. Baptists were banned from being able to live in Massachusetts. I mean, it was out of control from a division point of view. And then the separation of church and state came along, and it brought us together. It unified us, Americans united, for separation of church and state. And finally, it's one of the legs of the stool of our democracy. Just think about it for a minute. America wouldn't look like America without the separation of church and state. Without true religious freedom, we wouldn't be recognizable, right? So we need it to protect our pluralistic American democracy.
Turning to Christian nationalism, media outlets in Texas have reported on the rise of Christian nationalism in the state. You kind of touch on what that means and how it impacts the daily lives of people?
Yeah, sure. Christian nationalism is a term that we're all using a lot more today. I have to say, when we tested the term, before the insurrection, for example, I think 30% of Americans even knew what it was, right? But it is being bandied about, and I think it's important to define it. So one of the ways I like to define Christian nationalism is by describing it as a cultural construct, meaning it was constructed socially, which means it's changeable. So it's a cultural construct and a political ideology, because a lot of Christians I know wouldn't describe that remotely as Christianity. So it's about a political agenda, and it's rooted in the lie that America was created for white Christians and that our laws and policies should continue that privilege. Now, firstly, this is just something that a lot of us who study it have come to know. But the firm PRRI, which is a research firm, nonpartisan, did a study of Christian nationalism, and they found that 83% of Christian nationalist adherents believe that America is a country that was promised to European Christians, right? That's what they actually believe, and that our laws and policies should reflect that privilege. So we're not just sort of making this up. This is reflected in the data as well. What we say at Americans United is church-state separation is a critical antidote. It's kryptonite to Christian nationalism. And I want to explain why. Because the first faith panel was terrific. And what they were really talking even more about, although I think Reverend Charles was hitting on this point I'm about to make too, was the way you can use your faith to challenge Christian nationalism. And that is powerful, especially for people of that religious denomination, right? Because I get it. When I speak in synagogues, I'll reference, the teachings of our father, some of the stuff that I like in Judaism, and it's powerful, right? And so I completely get it. But it's also important, it's also important to reach the fact that we live in America, and American gospel is the shared belief and promise in the separation of church and state. That is a glue for all of us. It's something that, as we talked about, it unites us. It brings us together, right? And so when we challenge Christian nationalism, again, my colleague Amy Tai was describing these lawsuits that we've brought. And by the way, we're winning them. We are winning our lawsuits in Louisiana, in Arkansas, in Texas, in Oklahoma. In all of those places, we've been winning our lawsuits. In the South, by the way. Hello, America, in the South.
And we're going to talk about those.
Yeah. And so what are we bringing those lawsuits under? The constitutional protection of the separation of church and state. It allows us to overcome this effort to impose one narrow religious and really political agenda on all of us.
You mentioned the survey, the nonprofit Public Religion Research Institute, which tracks Christian nationalism. And in Texas, support for Christian nationalism is 36%, which is slightly higher than the national average of 30%, which surprised me that it wasn't higher based on my experience in Texas. But and it was nowhere near as close to the rates in other southern states. What do you make of that number?
What I see in Texas, not just from the work that we're doing with good folks on the ground and the energy that you're feeling here tonight, but from a poll that Americans United commissioned that Change Research did, a nonpartisan polling outfit, and they did it of over 1,100 Texans this September, so just recently. And the numbers were so positive. And I honestly, I come from a think tank called Third Way, and I never believe in sweeping anything under the rug. That's a challenge. I don't. Like, let's look at it, let's stare it in the face, let's figure out what to do about it. 96% of Texans support the separation of church and state. 86% of Texans support the separation of church and state. But the 96% number is of Texans who believe that parents should get to decide if, when, and how their children engage with religion, right? We've been talking a lot about that tonight, right? And those are some really high numbers. Also, a majority of Texans oppose all of these policies that we've been talking about that have been passed into law, some of them optional, like the chaplain option for public schools and the prayer time for public schools, the blue bonnet curriculum, which I'm not even sure we've talked that much about, a Christianity-infused curriculum for kindergarten through 5th grade elementary school kids in public schools that feels like it's bordering on Bible study and that whitewashes history. All of it, all of it in our poll, over a majority of Texans oppose. So, I know we're going to talk about money and politics and what is happening, and I'll let you ask that question and not just guide the dance too much. So back to you.
Well, and so we talked about church and state, and one of my jobs is to cover the Texas legislature, and we had quite a long session this year. It was interesting to me in January when there was a lot of coverage of the speaker fight, and I was at the Capitol and in an auditorium, an overflow auditorium, watching the speaker vote, and it was packed with hundreds of conservatives that were bussed in from across the state. After the vote, pastors came up, they brought a band, and it really turned into a religious service that included people putting on their hands on the walls and praying to bless the room and pray off evil spirits. It was one of the most surreal things I've seen in all of my years of journalism. What is that? Here's a softball question. Is that troubling to you, and why is that troubling?
But here's the thing, actually. So I don't know if this answer is going to surprise you at all. I actually think the question of faith and politics is complex. I think a lot of Americans love their faith. I love mine. I love Reform Judaism. It's been great to me. And I loved my childhood rabbi. I like to say the more questions I asked him and challenges I posed, the more he liked me and, brought me in. I mean, it's so, a lot of Americans are very close to our faith. And one of the reasons we are is because we have the separation of church and state, and faith is forced, religion, I should say after that first panel, is forced to thrive on its own, and isn't interfered with or co-opted by the state, And so what do? Right? Because you can't really separate out always your religious identity as a citizen. Now, when we become a public official, we may take an oath on our preferred religious book, but we swear to the secular constitution, right? And so that's a really important distinction. But when we're citizens, and even when we're like an elected official, by the way, you can wear your cross or Star of David, you can, you don't have to just leave your religion completely at home. No. And the public square has religion in it. I think you're more effective in the public square if you universalize your religion, but you can do what you want in the public square. I mean, the government needs to worry about it if it's a government space, right? It has to be equal and fair to all, right? So, I think those are all important things. So back to your, question, which is, sorry, this is long too, huh? But back to your question, which is, when I used to work for the Religious Action Center, I used to lead groups of students and show them what it's like to put faith into action. I used to lead them to Capitol Hill and say, this last panel was saying, tell your stories. Tell them what it's like to be a Jew. Tell them what you want our country to be. You can say that as a Jew, but understand that then it's our government's responsibility, politicians' responsibility to translate that into, the civ is American values. And then we come out with our shared American values, not preferring any one religion over any other or religion over non-religion. So, you can go and you can pray as a citizen and, but the truth is these folks that are doing that, they want the government to prefer and to favor one religion over others. And that, that isn't, what they're advocating for is Christian nationalism. It's a political agenda that is un-American and bad for religion and violation of religious freedom.
Well, and you hinted at this. Christian nationalism in Texas is on the rise thanks to political wins and money, lots of money, millions of dollars from billionaire donors. And that's fueled both incremental wins and large-scale successes in the state this year, from 10 Commandments in classrooms that has been talked about this evening, to book banning and a $1 billion private school voucher program. What else do you see feeding Christian nationalism? And millions of dollars certainly helps, but.
Yeah, so what else is feeding Christian nationalism? So firstly, on your point about the money problem is very, very real. Leonard Leo's sort of many organizations that he single-handedly funded together spent $500 million to pack the court, with ultra-conservatives. And that is a very serious problem too. It's a very serious problem that here in Texas you have, these certain public officials who are putting their personal ambitions and their own sort of personal religious beliefs and imposing this Christian nationalist agenda on families, sort of taking religion out of the hands of families and putting it into the hands of teachers who, by the way, I was just in Oklahoma last week talking to teachers who were like, I don't feel prepared to answer questions. Like, I take my job seriously. And they were Christians primarily, and they don't want to answer these questions. They don't feel like they're the appropriate ones to be answering these questions about the Bible. And by the way, neither do Texans want that. Texans don't want that, right? And so the powerful and the sort of the money is really a huge problem, but there are other forces that are shaping Christian nationalism. I would say it's also a backlash and a white lash against a lot of the changing demographics in this country. So who knows out there in what year America stopped being a majority white and Christian? In 2014. That's been a minute, right? And by 2045, America is going to be a majority black and brown, right? So, and then we've had, on top of that, these changes in the number of white evangelical Christians in our country. So right now, white evangelical Christians are 13% of the population. And you've all heard of the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, right? The religiously unaffiliated. They're not all they're not all atheists. They're atheists, they're agnostics, they're unaffiliated with religion. Half of them believe in God, right? They're spiritual, all the things, right? Guess what percentage of the population now the nuns are? 26%. They're double the population now of white evangelical Christians. That also explains some of the fuel and in the fire here of this white Christian nationalism that we're seeing today. And finally, all the social changes, right? And I just like to emphasize this point because it's a positive point. It's actually a hopeful point, right? All these points are hopeful that I'm making, actually, all these changes. And so, in the past 15 years or so, we've seen the advent of marriage equality, right? The Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, right? We've seen, a new generation, Gen Z, who are unafraid to identify as LGBTQ when they are, right? And so we've just seen, and I'm skimming the surface, but a lot of social changes that I think are also engendering this fear that I think Reverend Charles talked about, right? This fear, and sometimes we say that some ultra-conservative white Christians are raging against the dying of their privilege. But here's the thing. In America, we want Christians to have the same rights as Jews, Muslims, atheists. There's nothing anti-Christian about our cause. In fact, I'll just tell you all a little secret. It's actually kind of humorous to me because I'm the first Jew who's leading this group, and it's almost 80 years. But when we were founded, it was 78 years ago, by this group of Methodist pastors in Chicago and the head of the Southern Baptist Convention and seminary deans and Seventh-day Adventists. Our name was Protestants and Other Americans for Separation of Church and State. Anyone else here in other? Hello, I see you. And so, I think that's a really important point to make, that no one is trying to take away the rights of Christians. We want Christian denominations that are different from each other all to be treated respectfully in this country. And we want everybody to be treated respectfully, because freedom and equality are at the center of American democracy, and they're at the core of what church-state separation protects.
Amy, in the last panel. Amy in the last panel talked about the 2 lawsuits that that has been filed in Texas over the 10 Commandments. Hinted there might be more. So let's talk a little bit about what Americans United is working on in Texas. And if you'd like to make a little news here and talk about where the next lawsuit is going to come, I'd be happy to hear that.
Definitely don't want to make news. It's part of being good lawyers. So sorry, but we'll let you know right away. But we are basically really trying to support people on the ground. We are here to listen to parents. We are here to partner with these incredible groups that you saw tonight. ACLU of Texas, Texas Pastors for Texan Children, the BJC is here as well, and we're partnering with them. We are here really to lift up the rights of students and families in the state. Every Texan, we are here for you. And the way that we're doing it is we're working with all of these groups to send letters to school boards, to make clear that a lot of these laws that have recently been passed, and this was discussed in the last panel, even this bluebonnet curriculum, that came out of the education folks here in the state, the prayer time, the school chaplain bill, like all of those, for example, are voluntary. Like school districts have to approve them, school boards have to approve them, right? And so we're making sure that we're arming people in the state with toolkits. Like we created one around the chaplain bill to explain the problem, right? We're not against chaplains. Like a lot of chaplains are opposing this because this is an inappropriate, like the social worker advocate extraordinaire on the last panel explained, right? It's inappropriate to have chaplains who are unlicensed to be school counselors playing that role. And so what we're doing on the ground is providing those toolkits, writing those letters, and continuing to bring lawsuits when people report their violations to us. And on that note, if you do see a violation of students' religious freedom in the state, and you're seeing this bluebonnet curriculum being implemented, or a chaplain religion problem being imposed on students, etc., go to our website at au.org and file a report, because you can do it right there. There's a button. Just file a report. We are here for you parents and families in Texas. That's why we exist.
And you mentioned going to your website and filing a report. What else can folks do to combat Christian nationalism?
Well, there's so many things that folks can do. I mean, I loved the local focus and, really understanding what's on the curriculum for school board meetings. You don't have to be a parent of a kid in public school to show up at a school board meeting. Anyone can go. So go. That's a great way to either put your faith into action or exercise your voice as part of our democracy. So I think that's really important. You can reach across divides. You can reach across divides. I think, again, Reverend Charles made a point like this. Others have referenced it. Divides aren't just people who are completely polar opposite you, although I do think for everyone, for efficacy, and I just want to say this because I know it's easier for some of us than others of us, depending on how marginalized and vulnerable we are. And I know as a Jewish person, it's sometimes been scary to just constantly say I'm a Jewish person today, and my parents don't like it. But make yourself vulnerable. Like, genuinely, try to get in touch with what it is about this law or policy that affects you personally, that touches something inside of you that makes you feel uncomfortable or vulnerable, and share that story. Because that's like, there's nothing more powerful, because when you make yourself vulnerable, that's so human, and other human beings will always be able to relate to that and connect to it. So I like to make that point. But this is also a case where, like, in protecting the separation of church and state and fighting Christian nationalism, where you really can come together with so many people who are different from you, it's really exciting. Like, I feel so privileged to constantly get to be in rooms. And by the way, you can come to our Summit for Religious Freedom if you need some inspiration in DC, April 25th through 27th. That is radically inclusive. If you need a scholarship to come, we will scholarship you. Okay, so apply, right? Come and be among this mixture of people from all 50 states and the District of Columbia, who are every race, every religion, every background. It is so exciting. You don't just know intellectually that we have the power, you feel it, like you feel it there. So I want to invite you to come. And finally, I would say to join Americans United, join our email lists. We'll tap you into everything as well, everything on the ground, au.org, and support us. And support us because we are up against, I used to call it $1 billion shadow network, but it's not so shadow anymore. But it is over $1 billion by now from the last time we did the math. And we have a scholar and an author who is on our board called Catherine Stewart, and she just wrote a book called Money, Lies, and God, which is really powerful, exposing the money on the other side. And the way these ultra-conservatives are funding, they're funding institutions, and they're funding future leaders. They're really investing in humans and people, and our side hasn't been as effective at funding that way. So fund these institutions, these local partners who you see up here tonight. Fund our local chapters, right? We have one in Houston that's active, in Dallas. We have one in El Paso, in San Antonio, right? That would be really helpful.
And my last question for you, Rachel, is Texas politics, especially during the legislative session, can be pretty doom and gloom. So can you give folks some hope, and how do they find some hope to get motivated to take action?
Yep. They may have poured a lot of money, right, into their Christian nationalist agenda. And as Leonard Leo's assistant once said, it's because they're losing the culture wars, and the only way that they can have any hope of winning them again is by packing the courts, right? So remember that they may have put a lot of money into this, but we have history, the law and Constitution, and the power of the people on our side, right? So believe in your voice. Can I get an amen or an applause? Okay. Believe in the power of your voice. Reach out, issue invitations, right? And that is one thing that is really hopeful, right? And remember that you are not alone, right? So that's really important. What is also giving me hope is to see the rule of law continue to win time and time again. As I talked about earlier, when I talked about how many of our lawsuits were winning. You do not have to be a lawyer. I'm a lawyer, but you do not have to be a lawyer to appreciate the opinion of Judge Beery, I think is how you pronounce his name, in the Texas 10 Commandments ruling. It was forceful. It is a good read. I promise you, you can follow it great, even if you're not a lawyer. But Judge Beery did say, in addition to applying the rule of law, and as Amy said, calling the Texas 10 Commandments mandate plainly unconstitutional, right? He concluded his ruling with the words, "May humankind of all faiths beliefs and non-beliefs be reconciled one to another. And that's just a beautiful thing coming out of the courts that are insisting on upholding the rule of law. And I'll just conclude, truly, this is it. This is really it, with a favorite quote of late by James Baldwin, who said, "The world changes according to the way people see it. And if you alter, even by a millimeter, the way a person looks or people look at reality, then you can change it." That's it.
Thank you very much. That's a great way to wrap things up.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Can we get another round of applause for our last panel discussion? I definitely said last but not least because that was a lot of insightful information that Rachel had. And so we definitely want to give her another thank you to Rachel Lazar, who is also the CEO and president of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. As we conclude tonight's event, I do want to express our gratitude to all of our sponsors and partners. Again, we definitely wanted to thank Americans United. We would not have been able to do this event if it wasn't for your partnership, and so we truly thank you all. As we are concluding, I also want to thank you all for being here for this very lengthy but needed conversation. Also, thank you for being willing participants in this conversation, because past tonight, we have heard a lot of the what, but today we learned about the how and like what we can do next. And so it really is a team effort of how we can kind of change the narrative as we move forward. And so as we are closing tonight, please feel free to kind of chat with some of the panelists that you've seen, maybe if you want to talk about some of the insights that were shared tonight. But we definitely want you all to hang around and feel free to network a little bit and get to know each other. Thank you all so much and have a great night.